The parking lot was already noisy with cars and people who had come to see the mad killer, John Pilkey. My father Morley pulled up alongside a line of police cars and a van owned by the psychiatric hospital. Sprawled on the northeast hill above town, it was a secret world that refracted the town's rational mindset. Everyone in Maddox Landing called it the Bug House. On the station platform, the final snow of the season had begun to fall. I could feel its icy dampness seep into my Oxford with its built-in heel. Now see here, Mouse, I told myself. Your father doesn't have on his galoshes, and he expects you to ignore discomfort the same way he does. My father's hand was resting on my shoulder, as if he knew I was getting cold and thought he should do something. But per usual, he was distracted. His eyes kept turning to the wooded hill beyond the grain elevator and the opening in the trees where the train would appear before its plunge to the station house. By my elbow stood Ben Schulman, who, like me, had dressed up to see the killers. Ben wore his new orange cowboy chaps and a gun belt with 2 6 guns that fired real caps. He also had on a baggy Toronto Maple Leafs hockey sweater that hung almost to his knees. Ben imagined the sweater made him look thin, but no sweater could disguise his soft, doughy-looking hands and chipmunk cheeks. His plump cheeks and hands were exactly like the cheeks and hands of his roly-poly father, Dr. Schulman, who bore the uneasy distinction of being the only Jewish man in our town, where everyone was either French-Canadian and Catholic, or English-speaking and Protestant. To the right of Dr. Schulman stood John's mother, Mrs. Roy Pilkey, who wore an expensive-looking Persian lamb coat and matching pillbox hat, plus a pair of weird wraparound sunglasses. Even though she was the mother of a killer, I guess she wanted to look nice for her son. As we stamped our feet to keep warm, she said, "My poor boy has no luck, does he, Doc Bradford?" My father shook his head gravely, his eyes turning back again to the hill where John's train was expected to appear. On either side of Morley were Chief Doucette and the reporter, Kelsey Farrell. Balancing on our tiptoes, Ben and I tried to read the small spidery symbols scrawled across Kelsey's notepad, but neither Ben nor I understood shorthand, so we turned our attention back to my father. "Is it cold enough for you, Joe?" my father asked Chief Doucette. "'Spose to turn to sleet tonight," Chief Doucette replied. "Oh, we're in for it then," Kelsey said without looking up from his notepad. In the Chronicle, Kelsey had reminded us that John Pilkey was a local boy who had played with the hockey team in Maddox Landing, as well as with the Oshawa Colts, before he went across the border to play defense for the Detroit Red Wings. According to Kelsey, John kept a photograph of the young Queen Elizabeth in his pocket for luck. He could rag the puck, which was another way of saying that no matter where he was on the rink, the puck stayed glued to the blade of his stick. His body checks, along with his hooks, trips, slashes, elbows, and punches, made him a dangerous opponent. Although off the ice, he was known for holding the door open for his female fans. But there was no mention of my father in Kelsey's story, and I wondered if Kelsey knew what Sal had told me that morning at breakfast. John Pilkey had been my father's patient. According to Sal, my father had helped John Pilkey's father take out John's appendix when a November storm trapped the Lightkeepers family on their island in the middle of the Georgian Bay. Sal swore what happened at the Western Light was better than the biblical tale of Abraham and Isaac, but she warned me not to breathe a word of it to anyone, especially not to my Aunt Little Louie, because Morley, my father, disliked discussing his patients with the people in the town. Sal also said my father believed that a hockey concussion had turned John Pilkey violent, although nobody, including Sal, felt the same way. From the direction of the grain elevator came a low hooting whistle. It was now snowing too hard to see the train, but all of us on the station platform could hear it coming down the hill. We heard the rasp of hissing steam as it pulled into the station. The conductor blew his whistle. Then there was the sound of a door opening, and John Pilkey stepped through a ghostly curtain of snow and stood before me. I recognized him from the newspaper photographs that little Louis and I had seen that morning, but I was still surprised by how nice he looked. He had on a chocolate brown fedora with an upturned brim, a striped chocolate brown suit, and an unbuttoned raccoon coat that fell to the top of his fleece-lined galoshes. 3 men, along with the armed railway guard, followed him as he trudged through the falling snow, holding up a white Bristol board sign. In huge block letters, it said, "I am innocent." His companions were neatly dressed and clean-shaven, and they looked more concerned about getting out of the snow than escaping their jailer. I examined them in wonder. Did the boy in a toque really blast his mother to smithereens? The men were smiling and talking to the guard as if their train ride was an ordinary Saturday outing. More passengers came spilling out the coach doors carrying their bags. The guard asked the crowd to step back so the prisoners could pose for Kelsey's camera. While they huddled together, a man in a hunting cap tried to snatch the sign out of John Pilkey's hand. "Go back where you came from, killer," the man cried. A police officer quickly pushed the man off the platform, and the crowd shuffled closer for a better view. John Pilkey waited for the crowd to get quiet. Then he fished a harmonica out of his pocket and played a tune that Ben and I knew from school. I can't sing this, but maybe someone in the audience can. "Hail, hail, the gang's all here. Never mind the weather. Here we are together. Sure, we're glad that you're here too." John Pilkey pointed up at the snow drifting down from the heavens, and like sheep, we looked up too, expressions of awe and fear on our faces, although some people had started to laugh. 1 or 2 men clapped. John Pilkey took off his brown fedora and held it out as if he expected people to drop money in it. "Stand back! Let us pass," the guard shouted, and began herding his prisoners in our direction. Next to me, my father stirred. Morley rarely exerted himself because he saved his energy for his patients, but kicking the freshly fallen snow off his wingtips, Morley shuffled forward. "Hello, John," Morley boomed. Mid-stride, John Pilkey stopped. "Hello, Doc Bradford," he cried and shook my father's hand. "This is my late wife's sister, Louisa," Morley said, "and my daughter, Mary." "Why, you girls are shivering." John Pilkey smiled at my aunt, who lowered her eyes and didn't smile back. "Would you like to share my coat?" he said, and opened it so wide we could see its dappled silk lining. "Oh, we're fine," my aunt replied, her cheeks reddening. "I can see that," he said, and shook little Louis's hand, then reached down and shook mine. "John, it's been a while," my father remarked, shushing our spaniels who had started to growl. "A coon's age," John Pilkey agreed, turning towards some noise in the parking lot. There were wild shouts, and a gang of boys raced across the platform throwing snowballs at the prisoners, who ducked or covered their faces. It was Sam Mahoney and the Bug House Kids. At school, I was known as a Bug House Kid, too, because we lived in the doctor's house, which had stood on hospital property until one of its owners subdivided the lot. Sam let another snowball fly. John Pilkey stood his ground. What came next felt like a movie camera had tripped its switch to slow motion, so each second lasted a lifetime. Sam's snowball hit John on the side of his head and knocked off his hat. He didn't move, 2 more snowballs smashed against John's shoulder. He made a playful half lunge in the air while we held our breath and waited for him to demonstrate the murderous side of his character. A final snowball hit him in the middle of his chest, near his heart. Instead of knocking over the railway guard and running after the boys, he carefully brushed the snow off his raccoon coat. "Aim low and you hit something, eh, Doc Bradford?" John Pilkey said. My father grinned. "See you around, son." As the crowd watched, my father clapped the hockey killer on the back, and then Morley lumbered off with my aunt, our spaniels racing ahead, their ears flapping. The sight of my father sent the boys clattering down the station stairs and into the crowd by the dock lunch stand. My fingers still tingling from his touch, I watched John Pilkey climb aboard the hospital's van, and imagined his broad, dimpled face smiling at me through the window before the van disappeared into a cloud of whirling snow. Then behind me came a series of sharp, crackling pops and the smell of burning cap gun paper. Ben shoved his smoking 6 guns into their holsters. "Let me feel where he touched you, Mouse," he whispered. Giddy with pride, I extended my right hand, and Ben's stubby fingers pressed my skinny ones in wonderment. Somewhere in the crowd, my father was calling my name. "Ben, I have to go." I yanked away my hand. Dropping my eyes so I couldn't see people staring, I trudged after Morley. I was used to people looking, although I didn't exactly limp. I walked with a slight roll like a sailor, because my weight sank down onto my good foot, especially if I was tired. That day my roll was jerkier than usual because I was trying to step into my father's footprints where the snow was beaten down. He was too far ahead to notice, and that made me go faster, although the space between his footprints felt a mile wide. Down by the last coach, my grandmother had spotted me. Big Louie waved excitedly, one hand on her hat to keep it from being blown off. "Mouse, over here, dearie." I waved back and shuffled forward, the freezing wind whipping my hair into my eyes, my fingers turning to ice in my pockets. Before we arrived at the station, Morley had told me that he had invited the guards from the hospital and the prisoners for tea because the water main had broken. And I wondered how my grandmother was going to feel about entertaining a bunch of killers on the first day of her visit in Maddox Landing. Thank you very much.